is seen as a great war leader who seems to be delivering all the victories without the significant suffering that people still remember from World War I.
Been a leading figure in the Nazi Party since the 1920s. He's been Hitler's personal secretary throughout all of that period. So here was a man who was a big part of the Nazi machine, very well known, very famous throughout Germany.
There's a sort of general sense of, well, what on earth is going on in the British establishment? It just appears increasingly as a sort of a lunatic mission.
Rudolf Hess was not an ordinary prisoner, and his story was never an ordinary footnote of the Second World War. For decades, his name sat uneasily between official history and unresolved suspicion. He was Adolf Hitler's deputy, the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, and one of the few individuals who knew the inner political calculations of the regime at its highest level. When he died in 1987 at the age of 93, alone in a garden shed inside Spandau prison, the world was told the case was closed. Suicide, end of story. That explanation never truly held. In 2025, the release of long classified material forced historians to reopen a case that governments had quietly tried to seal for more than 80 years. What emerged was not a dramatic revelation in the sense of a single document or confession, but a pattern, one that recontextualized Hess's flight to Britain, his decades of imprisonment, and the circumstances of his death. Together, these elements suggest that Hess was not guarded for what he had done, but for what he knew, and that his silence was considered strategically essential by more than one government. To understand why, it is necessary to return to the spring of 1941. Europe was already deep into war. Germany had overrun much of the continent. Britain stood alone, enduring sustained aerial bombardment. The Blitz had reached its most intense phase, with London suffering repeated attacks that set parts of the city ablaze. Casualties mounted, morale was strained, and the future of the war remained uncertain. It was in this context that Rudolf Hess did something no one expected. On May 10, 1941, Hess climbed into a specially modified Messerschmitt aircraft and took off from Augsburg, flying alone toward Britain. He carried no official escort, filed no flight plan, and informed almost no one of his intentions. From the outside, the act appeared irrational, even delusional. Hitler himself would later describe Hess as having lost his mind. But the preparation behind the flight tells a different story. In the months leading up to his departure, Hess underwent extensive flight training at secluded airfields. He practiced long-range navigation by compass alone. His aircraft was modified with extended fuel tanks and specialized navigation equipment suitable for a trans-North Sea journey. He studied British geography, radar coverage, and RAF patrol patterns. These were not the actions of a man acting on impulse. They were the actions of someone executing a carefully planned mission. British radar detected Hess soon after he crossed into airspace. Fighters were scrambled. Anti-aircraft batteries requested permission to engage. That permission, according to later records, was never granted. For several hours, Hess flew unchallenged across Britain. Eventually, running low on fuel, he parachuted near Glasgow and landed on a farm. Injured but alive, he identified himself under an alias and immediately demanded to speak with a specific British aristocrat, the Duke of Hamilton. That request alone raised alarms. Hess did not ask for Churchill. He did not ask for military commanders or intelligence officials. He asked for a duke, someone outside formal government, but deeply embedded within Britain's ruling elite. The connection traced back to pre-war social networks and personal introductions facilitated by Hess's mentor, Karl Haushofer, who believed that elements of Britain's upper class were sympathetic to a negotiated peace with Germany. Within hours, British authorities confirmed Hess's identity. The deputy leader of Nazi Germany was in their custody. Under normal circumstances, such a capture would have been exploited immediately for propaganda and morale. Instead, the opposite happened. Hess disappeared from public view. The government imposed strict secrecy. Photographs were limited. Press access was controlled. The story was deliberately minimized. Churchill's response, according to multiple accounts, was not celebratory, but controlled and urgent. Hess was transferred into military custody and interrogated in isolation. The Duke of Hamilton met with him privately. What was said in that meeting was never officially recorded, but subsequent actions suggest it was considered politically explosive. According to intelligence summaries compiled at the time, Hess claimed he was carrying a peace proposal that would preserve the British Empire while allowing Germany dominance over continental Europe, united by opposition to the Soviet Union. More troubling than the proposal itself was Hess's assertion that influential figures within Britain were already open to such an arrangement. He did not present himself as a lone messenger. He presented himself as a conduit. That possibility struck at the heart of Britain's wartime legitimacy. In the 1930s, elements within Britain's aristocracy and political establishment had indeed viewed Nazi Germany less as a threat than as a counterweight to communism. The policy of appeasement was not an abstraction. It was shaped by real people with real influence. Some admired Germany's order and discipline. Others feared Soviet expansion more than fascist aggression. The abdicated King Edward VIII, later Duke of Windsor, had maintained documented contact with Nazi officials and was considered a security liability by British intelligence. Hess's arrival threatened to expose how far those sympathies may have gone. Rather than risk public scrutiny, the British government adopted a different strategy. Hess was portrayed as mentally unstable. Psychiatric evaluations diagnosed him with paranoia, delusions, and memory disturbances. Official statements emphasized his supposed irrationality, framing the flight as a meaningless act by a disturbed individual. Yet this narrative was never applied consistently. Despite being labeled psychologically compromised, Hess was not placed in a civilian psychiatric institution. He remained under military guard. Intelligence officers continued to interrogate him, carefully documenting his statements. His correspondence was censored. His environment was tightly controlled. If his claims were meaningless, there would have been no need for such measures. Over time, Hess's mental condition visibly deteriorated. His writing, once coherent and detailed, became fragmented. He expressed fears of poisoning and surveillance. In the decades that followed, this decline was cited as proof that he had indeed been unstable all along. Documents released in 2025 complicate that interpretation. Declassified medical and intelligence records indicate that Hess was administered regular injections during his captivity, described only as sedatives under wartime exemptions. The precise substances were not recorded in publicly accessible files. The timing of these treatments coincided with periods in which his mental clarity declined sharply. Whether these interventions were therapeutic, experimental, or suppressive remains disputed, but their existence undermines the idea that Hess's condition evolved naturally and without external influence. After the war, Hess was tried at Nuremberg and sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against peace. Unlike other Nazi leaders, he was not charged directly with war crimes or genocide, largely because he had been absent from Germany after 1941. Even so, he received one of the harshest sentences. He was transferred to Spandau Prison in West Berlin, a facility designed to hold hundreds. By 1966, Hess was its only inmate. For more than 40 years, he lived in near total isolation. 40 guards monitored him around the clock. Control of the prison rotated monthly among the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The cost of maintaining the prison for a single elderly man ran into the millions. Repeated proposals to release Hess on humanitarian grounds were blocked, consistently and decisively, by the Soviet Union. Officially, the justification was justice. Unofficially, Spandau served other purposes. It provided the Soviets with a permanent legal presence in West Berlin during the Cold War. It also ensured that Hess, one of the last living witnesses to pre-war negotiations and covert contacts, would never speak freely. As the years passed, rumors accumulated. Guards noticed inconsistencies in medical records. Doctors failed to document a well-known chest wound Hess had sustained during the First World War. Some questioned whether the man in Spandau was truly Rudolf Hess or a stand-in. While the body double theory remains unproven, internal intelligence correspondence released in 2025 confirms that British and Soviet officials privately discussed doubts about his identity as early as the 1940s. By the 1980s, pressure to release Hess intensified. Human rights advocates argued that solitary confinement of a non-violent nonagenarian was indefensible. His son, Wolf Hess, campaigned relentlessly. Even former guards expressed discomfort. According to Wolf, during a visit shortly before his death, Hess told him plainly that he believed he was going to be killed. 3 days later, he was dead. On August 17, 1987, Hess was found in a garden shed within the prison grounds, an electrical cord around his neck. The official verdict was suicide. The physical evidence immediately raised questions. Hess was frail, nearly blind, and suffered from severe arthritis. The cord was reportedly tied to a fixture above shoulder height. Bruising on his body suggested restraint. Witnesses later claimed the shed door had been locked from the outside. An independent autopsy commissioned by his family concluded that strangulation could not be ruled out. Key evidence vanished. The shed was demolished shortly afterward. Spandau prison itself was later razed, erasing the physical site of Hess's confinement. For decades, that was where the story ended. In 2025, a cache of classified documents surfaced through a secure archival release. Their authenticity was verified through metadata analysis and cross-referencing with known intelligence formats. The files confirmed that Hess's flight was not a rogue act. It involved intermediaries, prior contacts, and discussions among elements of the British elite and German officials in neutral countries before the war. An MI6 memorandum from 1987, written months before Hess's death, stated explicitly that his release posed a risk of exposure and that containment remained essential. The language was not legal, it was strategic. Hess was not protected, he was contained. None of this redeems him. Rudolf Hess was a committed Nazi, deeply complicit in a criminal regime. He helped draft racial laws and supported policies that led to mass murder. Acknowledging the manipulation of his silence does not diminish his responsibility. What it does challenge is the cleanliness of the historical narrative. Hess's life after 1941 suggests that some truths were considered more dangerous than public accountability. His flight embarrassed governments. His knowledge threatened reputations. His continued existence required silence. And when that silence could no longer be guaranteed, it became permanent. History often presents itself as settled. Cases are closed. Verdicts are final. But sometimes documents outlast decisions. When they surface, they don't always reveal heroes or villains. They reveal systems protecting themselves. Rudolf Hess died alone in a prison designed for hundreds, guarded by 4 nations, watched constantly, yet somehow unseen at the moment that mattered most. Whether one calls it suicide or something else, the context surrounding his life and death makes one thing clear. The truth he carried was never meant to leave that prison, and that more than any single document. explains why his case refuses to stay buried.